Welcome to Data in Chief, brought to you by Action. Join us as we explore compelling data stories, share analytic breakthroughs, and hear from leaders leveraging data to make a difference.
Hi, Solomon. Thanks for joining me on Data in Chief.
Hello, Christine. Very happy to be here. Excited to chat.
I ran across your company through LinkedIn and I've been really interested in it, but over time, I think I've become more interested in your background and how you landed building something in a sea of many, many products.
Great. Yeah, happy to talk about anything. So, yeah.
Yeah, so you are currently CEO of Delivery Layer, and my impression is that this is a data product. So can you tell us a little bit about your company and then we'll get into what data products are?
Sure. Yeah. So, delivery layer comes from my experience building customer-facing data products. I was at Nielsen for a while, but at other companies as well. What I noticed was that the tools in the world of data and like the modern data stack was spectacular, far better than what was there before. But the challenge was that it was really all focused on supporting internal decision making. And then the minute that the data needed to leave your company and go to your customers, the whole thing kind of fell apart because there are all of these assumptions implicit in data work around trust and usability and entitlements and permissions that are totally fine for internal users, but don't work when that's like your product. And I thought that there should be a better way because most of the companies that actually have businesses that drive revenue off of data end up building a lot of custom software. And I thought that there should be something to help companies be able to launch these types of data products. If you have the data already, that should be all you need to launch a data product. You shouldn't have to now spend 2 more years hiring an entire software development team to go out and build something. And that's where Delivery Layer came from. And we've been around out in the market for around a year, and it's been a fun adventure helping companies go and build data products.
So just because I've done a lot of consulting recently and not as much in-house work, can we delve into this one use case for me, which is every time I try and work with a company, I have to get access to their systems. And the first thing they want to do is give me a gigantic CSV flat file of the data to work with, or just that permissioning as either a contractor or a consultant. Is that one of the use cases that you're addressing?
Yeah, great question. Not as much because to the point that you just made, normally a consultant, when you're hiring them, since you're paying the consultant, they will work the way that you tell them to, right? You don't need to like give them really good looking application and platform because if it looks like an engineer developed it as opposed to a designer developed it, that they're gonna stop taking your money, right? And there's nothing wrong with that, right? That is the way that internal analytics is supposed to do. Companies are generally able to get you access to their database or their data in a hacky way, but it works for internal people. The challenge with Delivery Layer is more focused on those external people where they're paying you, and what they don't want is to feel like they have this low budget, hacky experience when they're paying you a lot of money for the data. And so that's more of the use case, less of like enabling internal or consulting, more about enabling your customers who are actually going to pay you.
Yeah, that's a great clarification. And, I think we've all witnessed these hacky solutions where, one of the points that you make on your website that I really just love is that the hard part of data products should be the data itself, not the last mile delivery of that data to your customers, right? So you've done the curation work, you've cleaned it, you have a governance process, and you just want to serve it up. And we know how much that's like the hidden iceberg, right, of
Yeah.
the work.
Yeah, 100%. And it was really surprising to me on the other side of it also, as I sort of did more and more of this, because you would think that because companies aren't generally trying to create new ways of delivering data. They want it well executed, but nobody's trying to create like a newer, better version of a data table as their product. They're trying to get their data well organized with meaning to a customer in a data table. And if Coke and Pepsi log in to the same website with the same URL, they should never see each other's data. So like permissions matter a lot, but they're not trying to invent some sort of new thing that's the next better data table. They just want their data in a data table. And that's really where delivery layer fits into the equation. It's how do you take your data, which is the valuable part, and actually get it to your customers. In cases where you don't have a natural application that you would deliver it to your customers. In some cases, some data products, it's obvious that you're going to deliver it through an existing web application that your customers already log into, and you already have the permissions on the back end, and you just need your developers to implement a JavaScript charting library and run a couple of queries, but you already have the application, you have everything that you need. Delivery layer is for when you don't have any of that and you're starting from scratch, and your choice is spend 2 years building out an entire front-end application or go with something like delivery layer.
Yeah. Have you seen that change with tools like Bubble or Five or some of, Retool? There's a lot of low code, no code ways to package up data.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I would say there have always been there have always been a lot of ways in this space to take very simple use cases and deliver them, right? Like I would say embedded BI products are an example of this, where if you've got a very basic set of permissions and a couple of charts and graphs, but nothing really complex, and you don't have a lot of customers and you don't have a lot of complexity, embedding something like that has always been around. And so I think, yes, the tools like the Bubbles and the other no-code platforms are viable options, or hosting your data on like, a smart sheet or an Airtable, and like those are viable options. I think where they fall apart is when you start to actually have any complexity in the business that sits on top of that, and that's where a lot of those tools fall apart. So for example, the moment that you start to need APIs in addition to a chart, your whole situation suddenly becomes untenable. If you've got complicated permissions and entitlements where you've got different teams and accounts at a customer, and maybe you want the executives to get access to certain data, but you don't want the rest of the teams, or you want some teams to have certain access and other teams to have other access, or if you have 1,000 customers on an application, running it through some of these low code tools starts to become challenging, not because the charting capability is bad, but because the challenge with the applications actually is not the charting. It's all of the permissions and entitlements and account management side of how you package and position your data to actually drive real revenue in a customer facing data business. So that's really where delivery layer has built most of the like functionality that I would say differentiates us from any other tool, is in the account management, how you can package and position products to be able to spin up new products quickly that are either syndicated, that can go out to thousands of customers, or that might be very custom for just one really large client that you have, that you need to do some extra stuff that becomes very difficult to do in most of the traditional ways that these applications get built.
Yeah.
So I guess it's just an opinionated way of based on my experience making every single mistake building these applications in the past and leading businesses that are driving significant revenue off of customer facing data. I've seen all of the ways that this fails. And so when I built Delivery Layer, it was tailor made for these types of applications, which has pluses and minuses because I talk to a lot of people who have internal data problems or other data things. And I just have to say, Delivery Layer is not good for you. But for that very specific slice, Delivery Layer is really good for them.
Yeah, I feel like we could go so many directions from there. I like to drill a little bit more back to the data product concept and just say, what would make either an application or a use case really a data product use case versus that BI instance? Is it the longevity? Is it the access method? Is it, how do you see that a data product is something that's packaged and valuable separate from the inherent data itself?
Great question. Okay. So I personally make a distinction because data product is a term that people can interpret in many ways. So I want to very precisely define what I mean when I say a data product. And to me, a data product is specifically something that something that your customers are buying that is driven from your data. And so, for example, I'll give some examples of things that would be considered data products and wouldn't be considered data products under that. Obviously, where I've worked before, like a company like Nielsen, right? They're all data products. They sell their data, that the data is the product. But I would say that for Amazon, the Amazon recommendation system is a data product because it's literally in the path of what customers are using to drive revenue for the business. And so for me, in the same way that your software product is what your customers are buying, the data product is something that customers buy in some way, or is used to very specifically drive revenue from customers. And some people use data products more broadly to also include internal data applications that are, helping to support business decision making. If you have an account scoring model that looks at companies in your pipeline and scores them with how likely those companies are to turn into customers, that some people consider that a data product because it's some discrete application that the data team builds that is used to support their own internal business. But I wouldn't consider that a data product. To me, a product is something that a customer buys. So that's just the way that I have that distinction. And so that to me is a data product.
Yeah. Yeah, it's making me think of big transitions in pricing to go from what units of what we monetize from. And so, you think of a company like Johnson Controls and they have these HVAC systems, but they're getting so digitally complex that there's the hardware that they're selling, and then there's the system monitoring, and there's the software, and they're building a huge data repository, even like an EKG or any of the Internet of Things examples where we know that there's a device, but then we know that there's a data stream related to the device. And so many companies that were in manufacturing are now finding themselves sort of software companies who have a huge data repository, and that data could be turned into insights and predictive analytics that they're either monetizing to sell their products on subscription basis, and then they're managing the risk associated with broader pools of usage, or they're selling that data on to their own customer base, anonymizing it, distributing it more in the way that Nielsen or other data aggregators would have done, who weren't the primary industry providers, but they're just the data broker. And so there's this blend of roles, really.
Yeah. And I think that this is a big theme and a big trend, and it is a really good thing for companies to be doing a lot more of this, because to your example, right? Like you can drive revenue from a new business line. Like if you're taking input data and then able to share that back with customers to help them make better decisions, or to help them better have better experiences with your product, on the sort of like, log monitoring side, that's great. Like that helps you differentiate compared to other companies that can't do that, and that becomes part of your product, where the data is an integral piece of your overall value proposition. How much of that, new value you capture via increased revenue, or how much of it just like keeps your product sticky, is obviously going to be dependent on your industry. But in general, the more value that you're delivering to customers, the bigger and better of a business you're going to have. And on the opposite side, again, companies oftentimes find themselves sitting on really interesting data that could be good benchmark data for people in the industry, or could help their customers generally make better decisions on a strategic level, not necessarily just tactical tuning the HVACs with the logs, but what are some best practices around how to think about capacity planning, and tons of benchmark data. And for companies that are able to take what they already have on the shelf, because they already have the data, and if you can take that and start giving it to your customers, the more that you can give them things that they care about, the better you're going to do as a business.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think the benchmark use case is probably the one that is most top of mind for me. I was working with a plumbing company recently, and they use a product called Service Titan. And I got so excited about the idea of Service Titan getting into machine learning and getting using data from across their customer base, all this operational data about call dispatching and, win loss, where you could start to see market pricing in different geographies. And you really could get pretty phenomenal information that no individual company was going to be able to have access to, and probably never existed before the digitization of so many manual processes.
Yeah, 100%. And there's so much you can do with it. And you could even go further than just sharing the data. Like you can share machine learning models, and you can share other things. Like imagine this. Imagine you're sending data to 500 customers, and then 450 of them are all doing the same thing with it, right? Like they're using it to drive some sort of maintenance prediction on an HVAC machine, right? Well, if you can offer maintenance prediction as part of your data product, suddenly they don't have to build out teams to go and do that maintenance prediction. And by the way, because you see maintenance prediction problems across 500 customers instead of just one customer, you probably have a lot more insights around how to do that than the company than the companies that you'd be sending data to. And so it's another example of how you've got multiple different levels of value that you can provide. You can provide just the raw data, which is valuable. You can package it together into insights, which is also even more valuable. And you can even go a step further and take it all the way to, giving, actionable decision-making data that they can go act on, instead of needing to do that interpretation themselves. And that's just, stacks up the value that you're driving. Again, you can charge for it. So if you're looking for revenue, it might just be sitting there in your data.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the thoughts I had with the conversation around data is the new oil, or data is gold. It is if you do something with it, right? But it's also just very costly if it's sitting in some cloud data warehouse somewhere.
Yeah, 100%. And what's interesting to me, and when a lot of people think about selling data or having data as a product, they think about the raw data as a product. But similar to raw oil, you don't do much with raw oil. Raw oil needs to be refined into the various different things that it actually gets used for, right? And so data is the same way. Raw data by itself means that whoever's buying that raw data from you needs to hire a team of people to refine it and get it to in a state that can drive some sort of value. Whereas if you're able to do that refining, and by the way, you're probably better situated to do that refining because since it's your data, you understand it better than the people that are receiving it 95% of the time. And so if you're able to do that, suddenly you're not selling oil, you're selling gasoline, and companies don't have to pay for that refining because it's already done, and they can just use it immediately instead of need to build a processing plant.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think a couple of points there. There's not a field with more economies of scale than data, I would say. And we're learning that so much with AI, machine learning, that the more that you have, the better predictions you can make. And, just for benchmarking, if you could survey a whole industry, it's a lot different than one business at a time. And then the other thought here is if we could segue into this sort of build versus buy decision, those economies of scale of somebody else having built it versus, and then, sorry, I'm loading you up with too many things here, but
totally fine.
So the build versus buy, you mentioned having made all the mistakes before. And I think that's a critical aspect of that build buy trade-off is that if you're making the mistakes on your own dime with your own customer base, it can be really consequential.
Yeah. I mean, build versus buy is like always one of the biggest questions, and there's not always even one answer or the other. Like even when you build, you're very likely not building everything, right? Like if I don't know a single application that has been built in the last 20 years that built their own payment processing, right? Everybody has used Stripe or Braintree or one of the other payment processing vendors. People don't write their own web applications, like web application frameworks. They use a web application framework. They use open source libraries, right? And so even your build is borrowing heavily from other sources. People are hosting on AWS. So it's always a question of like which pieces are you buying and which pieces are you building. Delivery layer obviously is sort of takes the point of view that for a data product, the value is in the data. The value, and the differentiation is generally not in the front end. And not that there isn't differentiation, but that there are like common things that everybody needs to do that you'll differentiate in, and that the benefit of being able to launch in 6 weeks at a smaller price point offsets the needing to hire a team of 7 engineers and designers and product managers and DevOps people to build an application that takes 2 years. And so, but every piece of that is going to come with a business trade-off for your specific situation. There are some companies culturally that just always try to build. There are some companies culturally that always try to buy. There's a lot of spectrum in between. And so I think that there's no right answer. And it makes sense to evaluate the specifics of what you're trying to build. But I generally, having run data teams for a long time, try to buy whenever I can and have always tried to buy whenever I can, because when people build things internally, unless it's like the one thing that you're building, and so you're going to be able to support it forever, and you're going to have a big team behind it, and you're going to have all of the safeguards for when people leave the company and how that application continues to be maintained forever. That is the biggest thing that I think, unless you've been in the data industry for a long time, you don't appreciate, because until you've seen the same system have people come in and say, oh, the person who built that before in sort of a super hacky way did it so badly, and it would be so difficult for me to even understand what they did, that it's just easier for me to build this whole thing again from scratch. And like, by the time you get to like version number 3 of that, or by the time you've seen like 2 or 3 projects fail because someone leaves and you just like now lost your key engineer and don't have a front end for your product. Those are the things that like the technical side of the build versus buy, like generally people who are making those technical decisions don't appreciate how much and how frequently projects blow up for non-technical reasons. So that's why for me, when it makes sense to buy, I think that finding a vendor where something is going to be well supported is better than trying to hack it together yourself.
Yeah, I think that's so interesting because, as you're speaking, I was kind of going through the checklist of projects that I've seen blow up or that I landed because somebody was in that situation. I was driving into Canada last year and I saw, a Pizza Hut restaurant with the classic Pizza Hut roof, and the property right next to it was the new Pizza Hut restaurant that was under construction. And I just couldn't look at the 2 side-by-side buildings with probably identical square footage, on the same side of the road with all the same attributes, except for one was new, and not think about software projects. Like, we're just going to level this one and start over.
Yeah. Yeah. And I've seen it enough times where if it's to the point where whatever you're doing is the key thing for your business and you need very specific result in a very specific way that you can't get with off-the-shelf tools, then that's the core of your business. You have to build it. And if it's not the core of your business, and if it is, if you can live with the downside, like you never get rid of your problems, you only change them for new problems. Most of the tools that you buy, and not even just talking about delivery, I'm talking about in general, any type of tool that you buy for any use case, they'll often have significantly more advanced generic functionality because that is what they will focus on, because that serves the most people in that specific domain. And so the generic functionality that they're going to have that most people use all the time is going to be far better than what you're going to build for yourself, because you're only working for your one specific use case. And then suddenly a year from now, when you're like, oh, actually, we also need this other feature that everyone else needed, but we didn't realize that we needed back a year ago when we started to build this thing. That's the downside of building it yourself. The plus side of building it yourself is you do get to have complete 100% control over everything. And, it's always a trade-off. There's no right answer for all circumstances. And there's no counterfactuals to sometimes know whether you made a good decision or bad decision. But yeah, that's what you have to manage when you're thinking about build versus buy.
Yeah. I think financial services is one of the industries where the proprietary algorithms, where their view on the market is the secret sauce, right? It's this, they're hiring all the best quants because it matters. And there's a lot of other industries where you just have to show up on time, make common sense decisions. The data is important, but it's in support of a different core mission. It's not the business. I'm trying to think, other than financial services, who is so embedded in the logic or in the system design.
Well, I actually think that for data products, companies should own the process of creating that data, because I think that is very proprietary. That anytime that the data is your product, how that data gets created is your IP. That's the value of your business, because if the data is the product or the thing that drives the product, you do need to you can't like rely on a vendor for the business logic. You can buy a database. You can rely on them for a database. You don't need to re-implement a database, but like the steps that you use to transform raw data into something valuable, that always needs to be something that you own. I've also got some points of view on like data products in particular that also that business logic should live in, it should get valuable data landed in a database. Like the business logic should not be in a front end tool, because the minute that your business logic it lands in a front end tool, what that means is that your data set is now worthless, because you can't actually go and query your data and have it match up the actual product that your customers are getting. Every single query that you do, or every single time that you need to pull data, suddenly you need to re-implement every single element of that business logic that you put into the front end tool, and it just gets completely unwieldy. And if the idea is that the value is in the data, then what you do when you put that logic somewhere where the data isn't good enough by itself is that you've made that asset as the data worthless. And so for anybody that's listening that's thinking about building some sort of application on top of your data, make sure that your data actually is like final kind of landed data that's ready to be delivered, however you deliver it, as opposed to having the front end create the value and the business logic.
Yeah, I guess the first thing that comes to mind is, any sort of exception filtering, throwing out outliers or aggregations, right? Whatever your date time references are. There's lots of ways that you process data and then can debate if it's the same methodology with somebody else later, right?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, whatever it is that your customers are looking at or your customers are going to want to see or is important, like, if you have all of your, if in the database you have countries, right, as a field, and in your front end application you have regions that group certain countries together, if you don't have that same logic in your data, if it doesn't live anywhere in your database, that you've got a mapping table between country and region, then anytime that your customer says, hey, can I see what happened in this region, you're going to have to figure out like what countries are in that region. You might have to go bug a software engineer to look inside the code to go and give you a list of all of the countries in that region, and then, copy that over to a random SQL query. And then the next person that does that 6 months from now is going to have to do the same thing over again. And that's like a small example of the kind of business logic that will oftentimes live in a front end instead of live in a data.
Yeah, it's consistently a problem for me when sales hierarchies get realigned and you don't know what the former alignment was. And so you're trying to tease out, did the sales rep impact the market or did the mix shift? There's a lot of that kind of historical stamping of, business attributes that you need to maintain.
Yeah, 100%.
Interesting. Yeah, so I feel like I could talk to you all day. We could talk about semantic layers. We could go so many different directions, but why don't we just end with one of the simplest use cases that I saw for delivery layer? And just because it's my core domain, I was thinking about a project I did where the software we were trying to use didn't really support distributors logging into the manufacturer's site to look at their rebate data or their list price data, and to be able to curate different lists to external email accounts and manage the permissions around price list data. Is that something that fits a core use case for you, or
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it sounds like there's data there, and you need different people to be able to log in with maybe different views and permissions, and get some sort of insight into data that lives inside your company. So yeah, totally standard use case. It's interesting because this is one of those things where people oftentimes don't realize how much data is actually leaving their company in how many ways. And so the general question of like, if you ever ask yourself, like, how is data leaving my company? Like I was speaking with a friend the other day, and it was like, how is data leaving my company? And it's like, well, actually, I guess we have to deliver all of these reports to our channel distribution partners. And we've also got supply chain information that needs to go out, that we've got like 2 or 3 people that work on generating reports for all of those use cases. And then we've got our big customers that come to our internal analytics team and ask for custom reports, and we have to give it to them. And, they come semi-frequently to ask for things, and we just have to drop what we're doing and do whatever they want because they're such a big customer. And it would be nice if we could offer like those types of things in a dashboard to everybody, but it's just like unwieldy. And there's like a lot of hidden ways that companies end up needing to share data, but they don't necessarily think in their head like, oh, actually, this is a data sharing exercise. But it happens pretty frequently. And it's mostly done in Excel and in random reports that people pull, and in, I don't know how your company ended up doing that, distribution pricing or stuff, but I imagine it was like random Excel stuff hacked together and sent out every week via emails type of situation. I've seen companies do a lot of that stuff. So it's very, people have a lot of hacked ways together. And listen, in many cases, hacky solutions are great. Like if you don't need to scale a hacky solution, it's just a solution. Like that's great. Like you don't like it. I don't say hacky in a disparaging way. It's more like sometimes you can't afford hacky solutions. You need to have a real solution. And in those cases, that's where you have to figure out how to execute it in a more elegant way.
Excellent. Well, it seems like you have figured out how to execute eloquently, and I love following your writing and your journey with this company. I really appreciate you coming on Data in Chief, and looking forward to seeing your future successes.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me. And excited to see all of your future guests as well. And everyone else, come subscribe to the show. It's great.